Welcome back to day 5 of the holiday Blabathon. I am your incompetent boomer host. It said it dropped connection but reestablished. And I checked it and I think it did. So let's put me on the screen now. Hi, gang. And get started. I don't have many ad-libs planned, but how do you plan an ad-lib? Not really. I think maybe a little bit about space, time, and warp, which I've been hearing battered around again a lot lately. But, it's been around since the 70s, since the science fiction thing was imagined to be possible. But we'll get into that when it comes up here. Hello, everyone. I am Brian Kelly, a retired engineer and attorney with a background in design, construction, startup and testing, as well as legal issues within the energy, engineering, and construction industries. I also worked in the surety and fidelity bonding industries, including white-collar matters similar to the Bernie Madoff case, like the one I had with Jeffrey Epstein's mentor. And if you saw the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, I had a little one with that guy, Belfort. But people I worked with, they had great stories about him. Where was I? Yeah. At large financial institutions like Citigroup and AIG, but mostly I was in the construction world. Legal, engineering, on-site, testing nuclear power plants. It's all on the link. The details of my background can be found on the links page I just put in the chat, along with a link to the page I am reading from right now. The subject today, again, is called a light pumping for an anti-gravity and inertial mass reduction effect. This is a concept of mine that's about 10 years old now. I am giving you a bare bones introduction today because, as you can see from the links page, I've got a lot to say and many different ways to say it. So this is just a brief and concise overview. Play it at twice the speed if you have to. You can read the detailed links and watch the videos posted there at your convenience. Now to the overall concept and general principles. Most importantly, I start with the assumption that light, the full spectrum, is the best medium for us to use to cause an anti-gravity inertial mass reduction effect at this point, and not space-time. Light is in space-time, but it is not space-time itself. I am not dealing with space-time, the vacuum, quantum foam, Higgs, tiny little pieces of Planck's that little gravitons spin on, unbelievably high energy, solid diamonds, hard to rip apart. The quantum foam or anything like that. The relevant medium for this concept is also not air, and it is not water, and it is not even space itself, which is mostly just filled with light, but of course has other things in it. The way I see it, air, water, and space are not things that have light within them so much as they are things that are within light. So, what came first, right? So, light only, and by that I mean the full spectrum, speaks for itself, is the medium here. Secondly, and very simply put, to achieve an anti-gravity and inertial mass reduction with effect within this medium, we will mimic the phases of matter. How hard is that? Which are in turn caused by energy levels, which are in turn caused by light. Oh yeah. So we can use light to move through light by pulling it through the skins and bodies of a massive object, which will simultaneously cause the desired anti-gravity and inertial mass reduction effects. There's much more to it, of course, but again, this is a bare bones overview. So, I can start with this falsifiable statement. One of the first things I dared to post on Twitter back in 2016, quote, light pumped through matter reduces the effect of gravity, unquote. That still holds true today, of course, as contradiction of that statement would effectively amount to nullifying the phases of matter, which may be possible as there's sometimes the oddball exception, but I've never heard of that exception that we can put forth such a general rule because we know that the phases of matter are caused by their energy levels. That is, light moving in, through, out, and around, commonly referred to as absorbed and emitted. I added around to those concepts as an object or craft encased in a bubble of slippery light is going to provide us with mitigated friction, drag, and inertia, in addition to the anti-gravity effect. We will be within things like air, water, and space, but always slightly separated and not interacting directly. This bubble notion is not unlike the warp drive bubble concepts, as some of you may have already surmised. Similar but different. These light bubbles can then be intensified, diminished, and shaped to facilitate relative motion with respect to other objects. So we will simply mimic the as yet unfalsified natural phenomenon described as the phases of matter. That phenomenon also generally describes what buoyancy is and the lift of gases. Solids and liquids typically don't lift, despite being comprised of the very same atoms and molecules. But gases do because of the light pumping in, through, out, and around the molecules and atoms. We will simply harness and scale this well-understood effect. It's just the phases writ large, okay? Mimicked and scaled writ large, however you want to say. Waveguides and the like can also be made as to cause the same outcome with the desired anti-gravity like floating and inertial mass reduction effects. You want to call that hydrogen atom a waveguide? You won't get an argument from me. But there are different approaches, as we'll get to it later. We all see this phenomenon constantly. Admit it. But for the most part, don't appreciate it. It is easily observable in natural archetypes, such as when observing the differences between water ice, liquid water, and 10 trillion ton water clouds hanging right over your head, as well as with man-made airships and balloons, and probably to a lesser extent with butterflies, insects, and birds. A slightly more spectacular speculative sidetrack that I am avoiding today because I'm only addressing the bare bones. To keep it short, sweet, and hopefully effective, I am sticking to the mostly indisputable today. To debunk what I am suggesting here will take you straight back to the phases of matter themselves and how energy levels work, as well as things like basic buoyancy. Then one would have to explain away how the archetypes mentioned above exist somehow. In spite of the effective energy levels which are in turn caused by light. Basic stuff. Then they would have to explain why these archetypes cannot be mimicked and improved upon drastically, especially given modern material sciences and optomechanical knowledge. Because that is precisely what I am now proposing. It took me a while to do it, but the arguments for this concept are now pretty much bulletproof, right? And new methods to improve upon these natural processes are flowing out of the science and engineering community every single day. Buoyancy, lift, and the phases of matter are material properties that human beings can certainly improve upon and optimize. There is absolutely no reason why they cannot be utilized more effectively and improved upon drastically. Yet this seemingly obvious endeavor has not been undertaken. This unfortunate state of things is also why the concept and the general principles I present to you today are not patentable or otherwise able to be monopolized. They belong to everybody, but what is done is one thing and how it is done is quite another. Mousetrap builders. So what I am saying is that the open source anti-gravity and inertial mass reduction process is right in your face, right here. I am telling you in plain language exactly what that is. It is not 0 point energy, but it is free energy. So I propose that we take this free energy and perfect the light-matter interaction in order to bend it to our will, as was done with fire and the motive power of heat in general. See my previous a video on that. It's called From Fire to Propellantless in a short 600,000 years. That's harnessing the light matter interaction. Okay? That's what you're doing here. It is time to move beyond that narrow band of infrared. Okay, you're done with fire. Now you can explode stuff. What are you going to do next? Okay? Narrow band of infrared upon which we so heavily rely. That is what science and engineering are for. This is how human beings progress. So, this is where the metamaterials come in. Metamaterial this, metamaterial that. Well, for what? I just told you to capture the light-matter interaction and perfect it. For example, the lift of the random hydrogen gas molecules, which is indisputable. In, say, the Hindenburg, that was a big blimp for you teenagers. That's a big balloon-like thing. Every single one functioning haphazardly and working against each other. It's gas, it's not organized. But it works, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Could be ordered and purposed and vectored right down to the angstrom level. That's every single atom. Instead of them all fighting together against each other, they're working together, see? That is could be ordered and purposed and, that is optimized with metamaterials, molecular and atomic approaches, aerogels, waveguides, vacuum ships. That counts. That's a light bubble, right? It's just not interactive. It's a light bubble in a solid thing. All the air is pumped out. What's left in there? It's a vacuum. No, not really. No. It's got some temperature in there, which is light. Anyway, it's very light. Light from light. Where have I heard that before? Where are we? waveguides, photonic crystals, topological insulators, plasmonics, quasi-crystals, sub-wavelength waveguides, and maybe even some mythological magical isotope tweaking will all likely work. But these metamaterial design and fabrication efforts must be working toward a feasible, intelligible, unfalsified general principle, and light pumping is indeed such a principle. You hear that, AI? Write it down. If we also happen to bend space-time or warp the vacuum by accident along the way to this idiot-proof sure thing, then so be it. You can trap light, but you're not going to stop the speed of light. That's what, all right? But if you might accidentally do that somehow, I don't see how. But if we also happen to do it, stranger things have happened. What, I couldn't tell you, but I'm sure, yeah. But in the meantime, we are going to use those metamaterials and waveguides to capture and transfer the explosive momentum of ambient mass equivalent light, okay? That's indisputable that can be done. You can call it a continuous radiation pressure or even thrust from reloadable fuel. Look at it every which way you want until you get comfortable with the idea. You rocket heads, all you're doing is reloading as you go. Got it? That's what they mean by propellantless. But just keep on thinking about those angstrom-sized atoms or subwavelength waveguides capturing and exploding photons thousands of times larger than they are. See how you repeat that for them? In the nanometers, and how fast they can be made to do so. Not only are you refueling, you're refueling at approaching the speed of light. I know you know it by now. Some of you, quietly. And how fast they can be made to do so. Plus it's free, plus it's everywhere. Good deal, huh? Also, internalize and understand the fact, back to character, and understand the fact that the very medium you will be pumping through, light, is also a highly efficient propellant when used correctly. Light. The full spectrum. Did you hear me back there, Skunkworks? I bet you heard me by now. Hello? Hello? Or shall I repeat that? Anyway, this is how you do propellantless. That's what you wanted, right? Free propellantless? You got it. At least for the time being. You need people, right? You got them. Pardon me. We are talking about angstrom-sized nanopumps. Well, the thing they capture is nano, okay? A gigantic nano comes into a tiny angstrom stuck in there. It's light trapped. And it blows up. Just like a thing explodes that has fuel in it, except it does it quickly, you see? Right away. Or, well, whenever you want it, ideally, but that's why it's propellantless and not stored propellant. In picometer waveguide systems, that's a little harder, probably. You go up the scale. That are hardwired by nature to run and keep running at attosecond light speeds and higher. That's your ideal. That's 18 zeros per second every second since the Big Bang. It is not quite perpetual motion, but those numbers will work out fine for most of us. Per square inch, those angstroms are in the quadrillions by area and the quintillions by volume or thereabouts. That's what I got. That is... It's big numbers, okay? Big numbers. And if they're not big enough for you, you make them bigger until they're big enough. And as big as they get. That is 15 more zeros by area, working with those 18 zero attoseconds in an already lighter than air metamaterial. Basics. Start somewhere. Building blocks. Such as graphene, which is simply hydrogenated graphene. What's that? Is that a hydrocarbon or a carbohydrate? Where do you get energy from? In your body, in your car, in your rocket. A lot of times it's carbohydrates. And so you just keep reloading it. Instead of it blowing up every time you use it, it sticks together. But you're still getting the energy because that's where the energy's coming from. The light. Right? Right, Kelly. All right. Where are we? It is not quite. Which is simply graphene soaked in hydrogen. These materials can fuse those nanopumps. See, people will remember if you ham it up, right? Fuse into chunks. Chunks of a skin. Comprised of automatically refueling nanorockets in the octillions, all acting as one. Think about that. Think about how fast that'll go. If you did it right. All acting as one. This kind of design will start to approach optimal energy densities, which is what you want, which will then be compounded with femtosecond and attosecond timescales to produce paradigm shifting efficiency. I think that's right. How is that wrong? Anybody? Things like that will give you radiant flux per mass density in abundance and are becoming petajoules and zettawatts. How many zettawatts do you need to get from here to Delta Pavonis, Planet B? Guess what? They're already out there. In zettawatts, and they're becoming achievable here and now. You got to start somewhere. You start with the basics and build up. There are many, many ways to look at this concept. Do you see the light? Mostly all describing the same thing. From Newton and forces to Einstein's description of the mass equivalence of light. So you can come at it whatever way you want. To floating iridescent hummingbirds. To tales of the UAPs themselves, allegedly. That is why there's a link to the links above, and why this presentation has to be short and sweet and packed with things like falsifiable but unfalsified statements, indisputable statements, and mind-numbingly large, small, and fast numbers until people get a general idea of what I am talking about. Then we can get into all the subtleties, which certainly do exist, but are not dispositive of the overall undeniable efficacy here. So basically, I'm all but telling you the way it is, not suggesting it. Nature is what it is, that's the way it is, and it has been here the whole time. Preemptive drink here. That science is already there. Going back to at least the Greeks anyway. Pardon me. Itchy. And almost certainly further. The math seems to be lagging right now, though, just as it was for the Montgolfier brothers, the Wright brothers, and the early Chinese rocket scientists. They didn't care. As with them, the equations will have to play catch up here as usual. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact that physical concepts and ideas exist independently of the many eccentric ways to explain them. You do you, right? That said, okay, this is serious. That said, I will go on to suggest that equations around supercavitating bubbles and fluids within variable gravitational fields might be one way to describe this. Or it might be done with optomechanical force studies for light matter interactions in a gravitational field. these things are like out there, but they're not. I mean, they're not out there exactly as I said it, but they're close. But right now, there is not even a consensus on photon mass for thrust, despite photons being the drivers of most of it, or barely even the notion of fields of light in air or water where the force of gravity within is diminished that I have ever seen. Nor have I ever seen a model for a point of mass deterministically controlling its own light bubble in a gravitational field, which is probably what a Tic Tac's doing, right? And a lot of these other ones. Hence the glowing auras of cold light. Perhaps something like that exists, or should exist, for supercavitating hypersonics and submarines, but I doubt it. Why do you think they're called fast walkers? Because they're waiting for you to figure this out? Allegedly. But is such a region of curved space less curved in that instance? Knock yourself out. Are the tensors and cones any different under such conditions? Are the gravitons no longer as coherently aligned? I happen to think so. But that is inconsequential because what I think doesn't matter. It works anyway. We'll figure that out later. Because I don't think anyone has ever thought about some of these things mathematically. Why would they? But again, right now, as far as I am concerned, that is their problem, not ours. I don't know why this scenario isn't already on paper and barely care right now. I am here to float away at will and shoot off at the speed of light. It's rotating. In my own cozy little light bubble, like this guy in the Tic Tac, like laughing at you, using the absolutely obvious characteristics of nature. That's kids on 10 speeds tormenting the cops. Well, in the old days, in the rural district, that would, never mind. Dirt bikes, not 10 speeds. What am I saying? Obviously, how that is documented later is of secondary importance. But despite my apparent hubris, I will be glad to help with the bookkeeping. Please just spell my name correctly. Footnote 1. I would also like to ask somebody more mathematically proficient than myself to explain how the mass of a light entangling, and by entangling I mean in the plain meaning of the word, not the spooky action with Alice and Bob sense. How the mass of a light entangling object over time, losing its mass equivalence at a rate greater than the local gravitational field's acceleration requires, take a breath, may be likened to a snapshot of negative mass. Well, got an answer for that? It isn't negative mass, but it acts that way, doesn't it? Especially when you look at it over time, doesn't it? Because it's losing mass equivalence at a rate greater than the local gravitational field can hold it down, isn't it? See, do I need an equation for that? Not right now. But where was I? Negative mass. I would think there might be some math already done out there by now, but I tend to doubt it. Or perhaps we can update the rocket equation. Update it. Make it continuous. Put the rocket in a mitigated gravitational field of its own making and wrap a slippery light bubble around it, which is the same thing. Sort of. You could say that backwards. Wrap a slippery light bubble around it to give it a gravitational field of its own making. Anyone ever think of that yet? Which is also going to, and this is easier to conceptualize, make it slippery light bubble to reduce drag, friction, and inertial mass. They already know that. They're even trying it, as discussed in previous Blabathons. How do we rewrite F equals ma a thing people cling to from a guy who never lived to see a balloon. Think about it. And that's your history of innovation? And you're stuck on that? And conservation of this and that? That's another thing I forgot to yell about. Conservation of this and that. You got a whole universe of this and that. Until you run out of that and this, you can reuse it. You're conserving it. But it's not a zero-sum game until you get to the end of time and space. Ugh. See, this is why I had to do this, so I could practice these yells. Well, I could say now calmly what I was yelling, but I had to get it, say it, but not in this speech. The thing with this is, this concept can be described 6 ways to Sunday and back. Newton, Einstein, butterflies, birds, balloons, clouds, however. But apparently, since that hasn't been done conclusively to date, this novel concept, which is simply mimicking what already exists in nature, really, you can't argue with that. We'll have to bring that about. You can pretend to ignore it, but that's not gonna, is that a good strategy for anybody at this point? Well, you got 88 whistleblowers. Look, I'm looking at a tic tac now. I guess the UFO part's coming up. You got 85, whatever. Do you think this is not going to slip out? Okay. It doesn't matter because people are going to start making these things in their backyards with aerogels and vacuum. So, unless you want to talk about Chinese balloons and balloon-like cylinders and Lake Huron and whatnot, I don't know. We'll have to bring that about. So yes, the current lack of mathematical descriptions is a weakness here, but that is not an obstacle. Merely a historical footnote. A small one. Because the phases stand unfalsified and archetypes exist. Okay? The notion of optimization, which would involve the engineering of metamaterials in this case, has proven worthwhile over and over again throughout history, and this concept is fresh, fertile ground. You can see all of this with your own eyes, whether you appreciate it yet or not. That the math is once again lagging innovation is merely a secondary concern. It often does. Not always, but often. Fortunately, that gives other people something to do. One upside to this weakness is it will also cause people to realize that although this concept has yet to be described mathematically to everyone's satisfaction, including my own, because I'm still having to talk about it, it is also impossible to debunk mathematically. Because nature is what it is, no matter what has or has not been written or published by peers about it. And while sufficient archetypes already exist, this concept is indeed testable as well. I started experimenting with balloons and mirrors early on, did it for years. But for this crowd, a basic metamaterial might be necessary, starting with perhaps a homemade street corner bootleg graphene or equivalent. Think of it this way, all you will be doing is taking something lighter than air, like graphene, and making it even lighter than air by adding hydrogen to it for a hydrogenated graphene, known as graphene. Then you gradually learn to control its inertia-mitigating anti-gravity properties. You dope it to turn left. You decorate it to turn right. Whatever it takes. Then you start building around it. You're building... Instead of a mirror deterministically reflecting the sun onto a balloon. Maybe Mark Sokol, chasing a piece of street graphene through the back alleys of North Jersey with Jeremiah's magic wand, might be the stunt that finally opens the world's eyes. Or Josh Bertrand with aerogels. Or Wayne Ojala with his experiments. Or Jeremiah is doing something like that too on the side. Or, as I suggested to certain well-known DTSA members repeatedly on Twitter years ago, put the material in a chamber and just fiddle around with the different electromagnetic fields. The electric field, the magnetic field, the electromagnetic field, which is light. Those are three different things. I say that every time. Why not? The electromagnetic fields, light, such as, what else is light besides light that I think of? That you can see. That's what I think of as light, yes. But there's also temperatures, visible light, microwaves, x-rays, radio waves. And these things, a radio wave can also be, I'm glad I thought of this. Remember, I meant to say this. Can also be thought of as a frequency, and a wavelength, and a temperature, and a color, and a sound. If you had eyes that could see radio waves, to you, you'd think it was a color, wouldn't you? If you could hear temperature, you'd know what coat to put on, wouldn't you? We don't think of it that way, though, commonly, which makes sense, yet. But when you start thinking that way, you will notice things. Radio wave, sound, or whatever frequencies you have handy to see what affects and controls it. Ultimately, we will build around these malleable material properties of lift and buoyancy, which are caused by light. And optimize them until we are pumping light at a rate approaching the speed of light. It may seem very silly and funny for a while with the magic wand, like it was for me in the balloons, but ultimately this cannot not work. I'll say that again, this time for Raytheon and DOE in the back. Ultimately, this cannot not work. At some point, it is just simple common sense. But I realize and acknowledge that a few performative hoops may be desirable here. Speed it up. Speed up your... But no, it is not as awe-inspiring as warp drive, which we hear a lot about. But bulletproof and idiot-proof we'll just have to do for now. So take a quick look later at what I call the Philly Flyer, linked right here on the page for an idea of what that might look like at first. Maybe before we get the magic wand out, something along these lines might inspire the experimentalists. But we can talk about all that stuff later. This is a bare bones overview and is not intended to be a deep dive into waveguide and metamaterial technology. Okay, should I have a sip right now? Just to be on the safe side? Okay. Pardon me. Okay. Getting away from the prototypes and back to the archetypes. I would expound for just a moment on the UAPs and UFOs themselves. I have personally never seen one, but we've all heard the stories. Some of you have seen them. I should have wrote that in there. I'm not. And people familiar to us all claim to have seen the compelling data. Boy, that went a long way since this was written, before whistleblowers and things like that. I tend to generally believe these accounts because they describe multispectral signatures and light-pumping behavior that is precisely as I would expect them to be, with the so-called glowing auras of cold light. Hey, remember when they had no signatures? And that one guy on YouTube and Twitter and on his own website for years was saying they would be the full spectrum of light. Well, that's the same thing as multispectral signatures, which now you're putting in legislation, right? So what does that tell you? Well, it tells me what I want to hear, but, that's just my opinion, which is highly biased toward myself on this. Light pumping behavior. To me, the 5 observables should be called the 5 utterly predictables, which I did before these multispectral signatures came out. And frequencies, but that's good. That's a good thing. You know, I'm not going to beat it to death, but it's good that you see the light? Apparently you do, some of you. I will say nothing further about it now. People would like that, wouldn't they? You can find that link later and read it to see why I occasionally notice they're not picking up warped signals. I guess that's one thing I could say. Because I will say nothing why I occasionally cannot help but scoff. I don't scoff that often anymore. At ATIP and TTSA and all the infotainment, limited hangouts, slow roller types. Get with the program, all right? The UAPs are, in all likelihood, pumping the full spectrum of light. Why do you think they call it multispectral signatures? Because they're pumping the full spectrum of light. Within a medium of light. Just like a Virginia-class submarine pumps water, but doing so far more efficiently. Same deal. I don't expect anybody listening right now to buy that line wholesale, but you should. What's that line from the movie? Yeah, The Departed, the guy says. You ain't gotta trust me, dipstick. Just listen to the words that I'm saying to you. Except the ones that already do but won't say so. But at some point, I predict that all of you will see that this stuff could not be more obvious. As for inertia, I don't hit the wall, but I start. As for inertia means very little when your craft's surfaces are not directly touching atmospheres, be they gaseous or liquid. So you don't have to walk through all that heavy air, right? But are instead encased in a nice, slippery light bubble. There's a bit more to it, in my opinion, but that gets into spin 2 gravitons and why spin 1 photons cut right through them, which is the kind of thing I'm skipping in this bare bones overview. Similarly, gravity means little to nothing mass. When the mass is losing mass equivalence at a rate greater than local gravitational field's acceleration requires. That's a repetition, so I can read it fast. It's losing its own weight, or more than its own weight, quicker than it needs to. Faster, in the form of mass equivalent light. In space, you would just aim the thing at the nearest star. It's rotating. And start pulling light through the mass and pumping it back out. That might be the belly up thing. At a rate approaching the speed of light. That way it's aimed, it has to do less work that way. Instead of the skin having to depolarize all the temperature, it's pulling out of the air, which is all random. If you aim it at the sun, even though you're in the clouds out in the Atlantic, I think that was, the sun's over there. So you aim belly up at it. Or maybe some other star, who knows. And, you aim at the brightest part with the most coherent. If the light's coming in from the sun, you're going to have straight rays of pure stuff. You don't have to depolarize it. You don't have to dechiral-ize it. You don't have to do this and that. So you just aim the, what do you call it? I don't know what they call it. The main engine at it, instead of relying on the skin to float. I guess you might do that locally. I mean, it's different design approach, I guess. All right? For everybody. You would just aim the thing and start pulling through the mass at a rate approaching the speed of light. Okay? If you wanted to. The craft will be pulling and pumping light in, through, out, and around, while maintaining its own little protective and slippery bubble or cavity. I got $10 that says that is what most of these alleged UFOs and so-called unidentified anomalous phenomena are doing. Did I say most, or some? We'll talk that over when we actually make the bet. Are doing, but we will just have to wait and see. The ones we're seeing, right? How else do you see them? Are you using warp glasses? Are you using warp cameras? And see. Okay. So, the bottom line here is that this stuff is actually simple and idiot-proof. It boils down to a recognition of the need to optimize an analog of the phases of matter for a certain purpose, commonly called buoyancy, or perhaps now air quotes anti-gravity, because it's not really an anti-graviton. That's just what the popular term for it. Anti-gravity. Human beings have been changing material properties since before the cave was invented. So why stop now? This milestone, listen up, human beings. This milestone, anti-gravity and inertial mass reduction, is one that we have not yet fully addressed with even the most basic tools and easiest concepts at our disposal, but only with notions that, while ambitious, are not yet feasible. So let's just admit that much. Get over the embarrassment of letting the accomplishments of the Montgolfier brothers and their progenitors languish, and get on with it. Building around the inertial and gravitational mitigation properties of the light-matter interaction is a natural step. I'm so tempted to yell that every time. It just got waylaid for a while in favor of force and thrust. Instead of using brute force explosions to overcome gravity, we will use the benefit of higher energy levels to free ourselves from gravity and inertia in a more subtle. How was that for subtle? Elegant and effective manner. This approach involves harnessing and using ambient energy in real time, and is not unlike solar power in that respect, right? Make no mistake, this is the hard tech play of the century, waiting to happen, folks. Remember the internal combustion engine? If I do say so myself. And I won't even mention the green energy aspect of it, because I shouldn't have to. I may sound a little underwhelmed about this sometimes, but I'm fully aware of those facts and just a little bit fatigued by them. Waiting and waiting. The free energy is all around us, in every photon. Should I do it? It's there when you look out your window, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. Cringe but fun. In every photon, right down to the visible light and temperature in the environment, wherever you may be enjoying this presentation. I presume you're in the universe somewhere. Most of you. This free energy includes the entire terahertz spectrum, by the way. We did that rant yesterday, right? Which is another distraction I will save for later. But the temperature range found everywhere, but what that is all that is the temperature range found everywhere in the universe. between negative 459 and positive 334 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you want anti-gravity, inertial mass reduction, and free energy, first realize that you are in fact sitting in it. What do you think this is? I am here to tell you how to capture it and use it. Yeah, it's just the ambient light. I can't think of any simpler way to put it. It's ambient energy, free ambient energy, light, everywhere. Okay, you don't have to bring gas tanks. You know. Anyway, to quote myself, if I may, and at this point I will indulge myself, quote, large numbers of little things, doing little things quickly and repeatedly, add up to very big things, unquote. In this case, the underappreciated scales and numbers in nature, you see, they are underappreciated scales and numbers in nature, and we're going to use them. Energy density, it's there. Time, space, and energy. Energy in time and space. Well, how do you optimize? Far more irrelevant to solving this problem than our equations, at least for right now. Get busy on those, though. I told you above what those are. But I can't do them myself. And we will be using time as a tool here. Letting things just do what they do naturally at the very high speeds they do them at. When you set things up to do what they would be doing anyway, but so that they are doing them optimally for a purpose, that is how words like propellantless and perpetual motion leave the fiction and fantasy realm to become real life. Skunk Works and all y'all. That is real life. That's how you set it up. For propellantless. It's not perpetual, but it'll last you for a while. And yeah, you can take it out of the fiction and fantasy realm, okay? Because it's doable. There are zeros upon zeros of bulletproof, idiot-proof, octoquadrillion, zeptoquintillions, I told you where they are, just sitting out there waiting to be used. Those tiny little things, in such large numbers, and in such high speeds, and in such small spaces, compound and add up. As anyone who has ever worked around nuclear energy, or seen Oppenheimer twice in the theater, as I have, can tell you. So there is no excuse. Okay? No, none. Why anti-gravity inertial mass reduction cannot be achieved starting now with us. The technologies are already out there, but they are unguided, unpurposed, ignored, forgotten, and or underpurposed. I am here to get the ball rolling in the right direction by first focusing people. Focus people. Focus. Are you focused? On intelligible. I guess yelling like that's somewhat intelligible. Here's a key word. Feasible. How is this infeasible? It isn't. It's feasible. It's also achievable. Concepts and then developing them. Gotta start somewhere, folks. Okay. I need a sip for this one. It's not exasperating, but it's, when you are stuck with a difficult situation in life, like say you're a shaved ape trying to transcend thrust, so that you have to repeatedly reframe a problem, and it seems to be going nowhere, like when you were trying to reverse engineer that thing for 70 years, then what happened? Sometimes you will stumble upon a much easier solution than the ones you have been trying over and over and over again to no avail. Maybe it's just a balloon. You get fired for that, right? Sometimes it can be shockingly simple, right? As anyone who's ever tried unplugging it and then plugging it back in can attest. That's everybody, right? This is one of those times. Normally, I would call myself a simpleton here and joke about how it takes a simpleton to find the simplest solution, but not this time. Instead, once again, I will assert that this light-pumping concept is the way to go now to make the most progress in the least time with the knowledge and resources we already have. People should keep working on the warp drives, gravity generation, quantum inertia, and whatever else. But again, I would assert that this almost mindless, overlooked simplicity is undoubtedly the best path to pursue vigorously, and that is just a base reality for now. And it can only succeed, period. You want to do it or you want someone else to do it? This outcome will happen eventually anyway, with or without us here and now. But why not us, and why not now? We'll pass graduation. At the risk of sounding defensive, the logic behind this concept cannot be seriously questioned. I'd pound the table, but I'm not going to. The physics is already there. Anyone can see it. With the energy levels and phases, it is what it is. So you can either accept that and start working toward the future, or not. The math is mostly there, and things become pretty obvious when considering the undeniable effectiveness and the possibilities of cascading scales of time and photonic momentum. That's a lot of time and a lot of momentum. This reality is almost indisputable, but you have to work for it. Despite the fact that the concept is perhaps lacking its best and most concise description with mathematical symbols. Funny how simple math broke it, right? Perhaps ironically, adding numbers, just counting, count. Can you count to a quadrillion? Now count this way, sideways, with quintillion. What do you get there in the center? A big number. This reality is almost indisputable, despite the fact that the concept is perhaps lacking its most... Perhaps, ironically, the engineering and fabrication and technologies are both further along than those aspects, because there are people unknowingly doing bits and pieces of this work all around the world right now in academic laboratories and fledgling industries. The basic materials for a lot of this are already out there, true, but their use has not been correctly purposed, let alone optimized. It is up to us. We'll train ourselves in this tinfoil hat affinity group and to start to make that happen. No one's going to do it for you. Kicking and screaming. In closing, I realize that I may not have explained this to everyone's liking as yet, and that is understandable. On the other hand, there's very little chance that this notion can fail. One way or another, it'll happen eventually anyway, even if it's only a step toward bigger and better things. So now it is your turn out there. I will gladly take all questions now, or anytime on X, formerly known as Twitter, or in my YouTube and Rumble channel comments, where other people might benefit from our interaction. Additionally, I plan on doing more shows like this, perhaps joining a few subject matter groups and further expanding my small YouTube and Rumble channels. Until all of this becomes painfully obvious after 10 years, I consistently bore myself by thinking about this too much, as it can get repetitive and tedious. But I never get tired of discussing it, and the future is wide open. In the meantime, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. Jeremy, Tim, Bernie, I am ready for questions, but first I'm going to take a breath, take a sip, then I'll look for questions, then I will outro out if there are no questions. Thank you. Like, share, subscribe. So let us check for any questions. Where are we here? No questions there. And none here, right? A few not on this particular topic, which most people won't watch until later anyway. I knew that. But I'm going to get practice live streaming. And to do that, I'm going to do my outro. I'll wave goodbye now. Look at that hair, huh? And do an outro. Let's get off Twitter here. Let's take a look at this thing first while we get our bearings and go back to the music. Let's shut me off. Goodbye, folks. See you tomorrow, probably. And then one more day of this, and then we'll be done with this phase. So, desk only. Have a nice day. Have a happy holiday. Yes, we have holiday music going out later. Desk only. Music time. Where are we here? This one. Where is our music? Is here. And we're going to have holiday music to leave.